So first of all, I would like to welcome you all to the first roundtable of 5 taking place today, tomorrow, and the day after, and addressing 5 specific subjects. The first one is the future of business and management education, and that's taking place now. Tomorrow morning, the second roundtable will be on entrepreneurial ecosystem in MENA. The third will be on the 4th industrial revolution and inclusive development taking place tomorrow afternoon. The 4th will be on Tuesday morning on business reconfigured, focusing on executive education and links within the business schools to degrees to impact to the society at large. And the last on Tuesday afternoon on responsible business and the role of business school in the society. So I want to thank you all for being here. The event is basically by invitation, as you all know. So we've invited people from industry, from academia, from policymakers, from government, from NGOs, but also from our partners, the business associations we work with, the universities we work with, whether within the region or from other places around the world. I'm extremely grateful for those of you who could make it. And unfortunately, we live in a time of disruption. So the overarching theme for the 5 roundtables is disruption, but sometimes we get disruption more than we wish for. So I actually regretfully share with you the fact that over the last 5-6 days, a few of our colleagues who were supposed to be with us, because of the coronavirus, which is another way of disruption, either got sick, thankfully not from the coronavirus, but got sick anyway, so they couldn't come, or they feared getting sick from the coronavirus, so they opted not to come. And they come from different parts of the world. We will definitely miss them, but I perfectly understand why they couldn't make it. So just a couple of housekeeping announcements. We have to be done by 5:30. So we have exactly, to the minute, 2 hours. We will have a few opening remarks, and then we will open the floor for comments, discussions, questions, and we will limit each intervention by 2 minutes. So to stay focused and to give the chance to everybody to contribute as many times as possible throughout the 2 hours. So with that, I'll pass the floor to Howard Thomas.
Well, welcome everybody. I mean, I would like to stand up. I have a terribly bad back, and I was sitting down in the last meeting for too long. So I wouldn't mind if I just stood up and introduced the people who are going to do the initial speaking. But I think the reason Sharif picked me to be a moderator here is not only because of my involvement with EFMD, but also because, oh, okay. Is that on? Is this on? This one works, doesn't it?
Yes, it's working.
Yeah, my voice works, right? I don't need this thing. Bye. So basically, the other reason is my relationship with Boston University, where I have a distinguished professorship of global leadership. And over the period of the last 4 or 5 years, we've been running, first of all, a global business education jam, which was looking at the future of management education. And one of the books for that, I think, have been laid out on the table. If one of you haven't got them, that was the initial global jam, which was a large-scale computer jam that you can read about in the book. Subsequent to that, we discovered many of the contributions and comments came from people in the more westernized countries, if you like, Europe, the United States, and even the Asian people culturally came into the conversation late in the day. So what we've done since then is that we've had 10 mini jams globally in Africa, in Europe, in Asia, and in other parts of the world, Australasia, and we're basically trying, what we did in November in BEU was to have a global hackathon with representatives from each of those global jams. And what we did from that was to identify a series of themes, which I think are written down in the blurb you've got as to what the agenda is for this conversation. Just very quickly, let me repeat what some of those are. And let me do it very, very quickly. One is building a moral compass, if you like, the question of ethics. And that simply isn't a question of state capture, as you have probably discovered President Zuma in South Africa, but the case of Danske Bank in Denmark, and Denmark is one of the most least corrupt countries you could come across, but the way in which Danske Bank actually money laundered $2 billion. And it's a huge scandal in Denmark. So this isn't just a third world problem, it's a many world problem. The second one is fostering entrepreneurship and innovation. Very much in the development community, this is seen as a means of increasing growth in less developed countries, and as a development objective has become very, very strong. Sharif's own university has an entrepreneurship lab and innovator, which you might want to talk to him about privately. Thirdly, the whole question of digital and technological transformation and what that does to the future of work, what that does to other things of that kind, and I'm not going to rattle through. The fourth thing is achieving impact in society, and the role of the business school, not just in catering to individual businesses, but catering to all three sectors of civil society. So normally business, government, and civil society, and what the impacts are of a business school, not just nationally, but regionally. The other issues that we looked at were reimagining learning models. There's very much debate going on in our field about what you do with certain programs that are somewhat on the decline, but actually looking for technological solutions to that problem. I was dean at one stage of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and I was saying in a previous meeting we had today that within the last 4 or 5 years, they closed down their MBA program and went into a partnership with Coursera, where they do the MBA program completely for $22,000. Now, that is disruption. My own school in Boston University has just decided with edX to do an MBA program with that, the online MBA, which is actually prompted by many of the findings we found from the Global Jam, and we positioned that at $24,000. So there is disruption in the programs we're looking at. The other three themes that I remember from the previous discussion were about shaping leaders and leadership programs, particularly in all societies, not just Western societies, but how you generate leaders that are going to make a difference across the world. And you know, there are a series of points about criticality, agility, and so on and so forth. The last but one is called promoting inclusive growth. The phenomenon that, in fact, many societies have a huge gap between those that have and those that have not. Put in Piketty's terms, inequality is increasing, not decreasing. So what activities can business skills get involved in order to promote inclusive growth? And of course, and indeed one of the items in the roundtables is about inclusive growth. And the final one is catalyzing regional and global integration and focusing on global mindsets. And you know, Shireen's introduction is marvelous in the sense that the coronavirus has made clear to us how globally integrated we are and what the problems are with global integration, when we've been advocating for many, many years to have global supply chains and everything else. Look what's happened with, the current version of SaaS. So I think there are a whole series of issues here. I am not going to lecture, but I'm going to pick on Shareem at the end, but two other individuals who are very well known. And by the way, Tammy Gorfi, who is the president of ESCA in Morocco, is one of those who's got flu and did not come. And we don't blame him. There are reasons for that. But I want to introduce three people, and then I'm going to call them one by one in this order. Inase Okanedo, who's a very old friend of mine. I've got to know her in my work in Africa, who's the dean of Lagos Business School in Nigeria, one of Africa's best business schools, in my opinion. And we're delighted to have you talk a little bit about African challenges. Dan Leclerc, who is formerly was COO of AACSB and is now CEO of the Global Business School Network. He is somebody I've known man and boy through 4 deanships, I think. He's a very, very good friend, and he is going to talk about the subject of what business schools ought to do, what he sees as their roles and responsibilities. And finally, I've asked Sherif to stand in for Tammy and to talk about the Middle East and North Africa perspective on the challenges that face management education and the ways in which we might go about it. So remember what we've discovered in all of our mini jams. People like to talk. They want to have conversations. This is your opportunity, once we've introduced the material, 2 minutes or 3 minutes each, for you to pipe up and tell us what you think. This is the whole purpose of a roundtable. Okay? So first of all, Inase, I'm going to suggest you might talk about African challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to AUC on this centennial celebration. Now, when we look at management education in sub-Saharan Africa and we look at what are the factors that are going to shape it into the future, I think that, as you rightly said, technology is one. But then we need to keep in mind that when we look at the region, right now I think that 6 of the fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. However, we need to be mindful of whether that growth is inclusive. And when we look at the drivers of that growth and where that is going to come from, obviously small businesses have a role to play in that regard. Now, according to Africa Management Initiative, which is in the business of also trying to educate people using technology managers, 99.6% of businesses in Africa have 10 or fewer employees. And therefore, when we think about business schools and management educators, we need to think if really the profile of companies that are the majority are companies with 10 or less employees there, what should we be preparing the managers to teach those ones? Now, if we put that side by side with the model of business schools that a lot of us African schools aspire to have, a lot of us aspire to be global business schools there. And in the bid to do that, we start off with a curriculum that is drawn from what it is that's offered in Western business schools. One of the questions we have to ask is that whereas that curriculum is more suited for large global companies, when we talk about this context in which the majority of the companies are small businesses there, is that curriculum adequate to prepare managers? Of course, business education is being shaped by technology. And when we also look at the scale, the number of managers that have to be educated across Africa, and the paucity, or if you like, the inadequate number, in my view, of business schools, I think that technology offers a way by which we can reach this population. The largest population of college-age graduates going into the future is going to come out of Africa there. Therefore, what role can technology play in that regard? So we need to look at how technology has the potential to educate these managers in order that the continent actualizes the growth. Also related to the curriculum, and I think that's also tied to leadership, looking at the peculiar problems of Africa, is really whether the curriculum is geared towards knowledge in one instance, and the second is about the relevance of what is being taught. I think that right now, with the exponential rate at which knowledge is being generated, it is more important that people learn how to continually learn than content-specific knowledge. And therefore, what are those attributes? What are those skills? What are those attitudes that they need to be learning? But more important to all of those is a question of values, which I think Howard has touched upon, especially in the African context, where many times with leadership, certainly in sub-Saharan Africa, in several countries, leadership is seen as a way to further, in many instances, personal interest there. And therefore, what do we do with regard to that? I am always reminded of the words of Theodore Roosevelt, who once said that, you know, if you educate someone in knowledge but not in values, you've really created a menace to society, because what you have is a sophisticated criminal. And therefore, as we think about shaping management education, we need to also see the ways by which values can be infused. So I'll stop there for now, being mindful of the fact that it's 2 minutes for each one, and continue the conversation afterwards. Thank you.
You still have 1 minute. Here you
I
go.
still have 1
Yeah,
minute.
here you go.
Oh,
Yeah.
excellent.
So the speakers have an advantage over the rest of the crowd. Yeah.
Excellent. So I'm fine. If I still have 1 minute there, I want to look at how prepared African business schools are in order to educate people in these things. We've spoken about the technology, the curriculum, and things. Now, one of the ways in which we have, or we are seen to be of good standards, is really whether we have accreditations and whether we play in the rankings game. But then most times, I'm not so sure whether with the accrediting bodies, we're taking into consideration the peculiarities of schools in Africa. And knowing that when we talk about quality, how, you know, quality standards are high. However, what should we be looking for when we take into account the context in which African business schools exist? What is the purpose of these business schools there, and how do we measure that quality? Do we measure it by global standards? Do we measure it by research output, for instance, publication in top quality journals, which may enhance the reputation of the school, but do nothing to talk about the relevance to society? And therefore, should we be looking at something a bit different in that regard? I also think that with most schools on the continent, can I stop or continue? Okay, I'll just round up. I think that there's also the challenge of the resources that we need to be able to do all those, to develop the curriculum, to deliver using technology, and that's the constraints that many schools face as well. So that's also something to keep in mind.
Dan.
I thought I was going to get an extra minute there for a second. First, I want to say how happy I am to be here. Sharif has known I've wanted to come to Cairo and to AUC for many years, and I can't think of a better occasion than this 10th anniversary and the 100th anniversary and the renaming. So congratulations to all. And it's also a pleasure to be here with people like Howard and Anase, Andrew, and many of you, many others, because if there's anything that I've done over the years, and that's just to learn from them. So many of the things I'll say, I've benefited from others over the years. I'm just going to pick up where I think the three that have already spoken have already taken us, and that is this question about business schools and not only what they do, but how good they're at it. How good are they? And I need to say that nobody has more respect for business schools than me. You can't be in the business I'm in and not respect business schools enormously. Respect them for the kinds of things that they've done over the years. In fact, the way I describe it is that for more than 100 years, and for longer than that in some parts of the world, business schools have been doing a great job at doing what business schools do. Doing what business schools do. I think the challenge is today that the world expects more than business schools doing what they've always done. In fact, the formula used to be quite clear, as Anase hinted at. You know, if you're really wanting to do well, you hire the right faculty to produce the right journal articles, or journal articles in the right place. You recruit the best and brightest students for your flagship MBA program, and boom, you're a great business school. But that's not enough anymore. In fact, I wrote a piece about 3 years ago that says, for business schools, being good is no longer good enough because the world expects more. The world expects business schools to help change business and to grow business and to make it a better part of society. Right, I'm going to talk a little bit about this in 3 different dimensions, which I think is just shaped by the earlier remarks. One is that this idea that it's not just about business anymore, but about business in the context of society. It's critical that we address this. I think it's easy enough to talk about it in the context of what we learn and what we research, but I think it's also important to talk about this in the sense of we in business schools bring together the brightest students, the smartest professors, and the way we deploy them, in my view, has been underproductive when it comes to society. So it's very direct. How do we engage students in the right projects so that we make a difference? How do we connect faculty in ways that help them address the most critical problems for society? The second thing I think is really important is to recognize that the pace of change is dramatically different than it's ever been. That simply keeping up when you're in a business school in the ways we used to is no longer feasible. So more and more, it's pretty clear that business schools have to be connected with business, not just in terms of where our graduates go and what the businesses expect, but in terms of what we do and how we do it. So I believe the future of management education is experiential. It's very much engaging in learning as a consequence, especially since content's becoming more readily accessible. The third area is really just very much in terms of innovation and where disruption will come from. We've heard this term already, probably 6 or 7 times. My belief is that disruption in business education will come more from what's happening in labor markets. In other words, for example, the online platforms that are helping to rewire the way talent connects with opportunity, the way businesses bring in and the way they develop talent, all of that's changing. And all of it, I believe, will have a profound impact on the work that we do, causing us to focus more on skills and less on degrees, causing us to focus more on micro-credentials over degrees. So those 3 things, I think, we need to address all of them in the context of this roundtable before we're done.
Thank you, Dan.
Boy, with that extra minute, I could have done a lot more. But thanks for the opportunity.
Well, I don't know whether you did 3 minutes or not. I mean,
Five.
I'm relying on Sherry for that. He did 5 minutes. So
Yeah,
you're a bad
whatever the
boy.
clock gave me.
But I'll get Sharif back just to talk a little bit about Middle East and North Africa.
So again, thank you. I'll just, to save time, I'll bend what Inasi and Dan mentioned. And the way I see it, there is no one size that fits all. I mean, the issues in the markets might be the same, but handling those issues different from one market to another. Even within the context of the Middle East and North Africa, markets are not the same. What I can tell you is that if you go back, so we're celebrating this year, I keep saying 100 years, actually this year we're celebrating 101. So if I can go back 101 years, in the whole of the Middle East, there were less than 10 universities. Today, there are over 500. A bulk of the 500 were established over the last 30 years. A bulk, I mean like 80%. Wow. So I think that space is changing big time. But the good thing is that they do not need to start from scratch. They build on the experiences of other business schools around the world, where they went right, where they went wrong, where the lessons learned, and so on. Like Dan was saying, observing all the time and learning from others is extremely invaluable. And I think that's exactly what business schools are doing around this region these days. So some of them were there a long time, mainly national universities. Over the past 2-3 decades, many private universities are coming up. But also we're seeing the proliferation of many satellite branches of campuses from North America, from Europe, from Australia, from New Zealand, and so on, appearing in that part of the world, mainly in the Gulf region. Well, I have mixed feelings about that kind of operations, because I always believe that for sustainability of those business schools, homegrown talent is the most important. You can bring in faculty from all around the world, but you should also nurture and develop home talent from within. You can also should be focused on bringing in the best in terms of talent when it comes to students. So going back to Dan's point, when he mentioned how connected are to business. And connected, I mean integrated with the business and industry sector. I can tell you one thing. 10 years ago when I became dean here, the first probably meeting I said, guys, let's have a mindset that might be odd for many. This is not a business school, I'm not the dean. This is an enterprise, and I'm the CEO. The reason why I said that, I wanted to bring that level in terms of pace, ambition, innovation, entrepreneurial mindset to the level I wanted and wished the school to be. And I think building that mindset was influential and instrumental in building those bridges with business and industry. So the more we get students outside the classroom, the more they get involved in experiential learning, whether on campus or off campus, for me, is the learning experience they benefit from. That not to undermine what they learn in the classroom, but it's extremely influential in complementing that. So there's so many ways to look at that. How can we link that to research? How can we link that to service? How can we engage students to service? How can we engage students in projects that actually feeds into the curriculum as we move forward, let alone integrating executive education. Moving forward with the world of disruption we're seeing, I actually value the capacities and the skills that we need to sort of instill in our students way more than the degrees. Also, when it comes to the human skills, I think they almost match and are as important as the technical skills and the business skills. We live in a world, we cannot hide it. We live in a world that is consistently being disrupted by innovative technologies. How are we integrating that into the curriculum? And my last 2 points, how can we value that and measure that when it comes to the impact on the society? Yeah, we graduate the movers and shakers, at least in the context of my school, who make the difference in the market. How can we assess that impact? Whether they end up in private sector, whether they end up in government, or whether they end up in the civil society. So one common thread I like to leave you with is, how are we managing to disrupt or get disrupted and still remain relevant? And that's the most important point. How can business school remain relevant and influential at a time of continuous disruption?
And you actually kept a time. Yeah. So the floor is yours. I think certain topics have certainly been raised quite clearly. So there are plenty of people around this room, the CEO of AMBER and other well-known academics around the room, as well as businessmen. It's your shot. What we have learned from all the mini-jams is conversation is important, and expressing your opinion is important. Every opinion is the same as every other opinion. So let's go. Who's going to start?
Just a point of notion, we go down now from 5 minutes to 2 minutes, so stay on the clock. Thank you.
We're staying on the clock. Somebody is on the clock. So are you starting off? Yeah. Off you go then.
Actually, one of the thoughts that I always had, every time I'm faced with a challenge in my company, I read a lot, so I go to read this book and this book.
Can you say what's your business, just very quickly?
Yeah, we are in the training business, okay, but I'm taking it here from the perspective of leadership and management rather than the training part itself. So, and we're managing several units, so we're learning every day something new, how to manage remotely and so on. But my message here is everything after all these years and experience, and I ask a lot, and then you're faced with a new challenge, and then you start reading a little bit about it, and then you realize that the solution has been there, it's just I didn't know about it. And I keep telling myself, oh, if just somebody has pointed out, but also with the emotional parts of the business. Leaders are under a great deal of pressure when it comes to emotions. This is not, this is something I didn't see it taught anywhere, or it might be, I'm not aware of. Sharif, you mentioned the behavioral side. And I'm adding to this also the legal environment where the students will work or the entrepreneurs will work after that. So if the business school is able to have, to focus on these different areas, I think it will be relevant enough, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who's next? Could you
Hi, my
perhaps
name is-
identify who you are to
My name is
everybody else?
Rasha. I'm a transformational leadership trainer. I'll just give you 3 examples and then leave the platform to think about these concepts. Harvard School has done a course on followership. The title of the course was followership, and the turnout of registration was 0. And they have the leadership courses just crowded and a traffic jam over it like it never happened before. The other thing is that the executive education, the disruption is happening, like Howard said and Dan, is that Harvard is starting its executive education to focus on every single thing in the executive education, taking it from the school itself. The third thing is that Facebook has just hired a person or a few of people, a group, a bunch without a bachelor's degree. They only care about skills. And I'll leave you with these 3 examples and then go to concepts I want you to think about. What will leadership look like in the coming 10 years? And this term has evolved tremendously from the past to now. So now we tend to see leadership as leaders. It matches with the individualistic capitalist approach that there is a hero up there and he's gonna save us and he's gonna save the organization or the country or wherever. I'll talk about business. And now they figured out that with this pseudoscience adaptive leadership, and this is what I am teaching and training on, is that leadership is becoming an activity. It's not a character anymore. It's not one leader. And why is it an activity? In order for everybody to go and participate from any position in the organization. So what we need to think about, what will it look like in terms of skills, communication, critical thinking, emotional intelligence to manage the web of relations, have empathy, leading from behind. The other thing to talk about is how can we distinguish between technical challenges and adaptive challenges? And I'll leave you there in any organization.
Thank you.
Okay, who's next? Please. Please just introduce yourself so
Yes,
we
sure.
know who you are.
Sure. Samar Khan, Dean of Ifat College of Business from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. So we all believe that there is a huge gap between what actually our students are taking inside the classroom and between what they will face later on after they graduating. So I heard this actually from many students, not only from our university, but just like different universities around the GCC and even the Middle East. Maybe if I just talk about my experience as a student 15 years ago in UK, I finished my master's degree and I didn't take any final exam, I didn't take any quiz, I didn't take any midterm. And to be honest with you, until now, since that time, I still remember everything I did it with them. It was a real project. We worked with a real company. We worked directly with the industry. They actually recruit people from the industry, from the real companies in the industry to work with us as students. Is the time finished, or you didn't?
No.
You didn't even start it, so. Is it a VIP?
An advantage.
You got half an
Thank you so much. Lucky I am.
They've been disrupted by technology.
So my experience at that time, I take it, to be honest with you, with my students nowadays. And I'm doing this in the College of Business. I'm advising all the faculty to make a balance between what we are taking and what we are giving our students in the classroom and what they're going to face later on. If we think about what we are delivering and how we are delivering, why we are delivering this. The content nowadays is available everywhere. If you just give me any topic now, any new concept, and give me 10 minutes, I will come back to you with the full information about this topic. Google give us everything. And comparing between now and 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, if I'm talking about like ourselves here in the room, it was like more difficult for us to find that information. But now everything is easy. My students also come back to me sometimes and they said, Doctor, we find like similar information and we find some similar courses in Coursera, online courses, and different like MOOCs courses online. There is even University of People. So it's not about the information that you are delivering it in the class, but how you are going to deliver it. Are you giving them a real example? Are you giving them a real example of your country, for example? So this is, I think, the most important thing. How we are delivering the information to our students. It's not about what, the content is everywhere. Thank you so much.
Could I ask, before we get the next person, what British university were you at? Or you are not at liberty to say? I would say that this is a British university which was well advanced 15 years ago.
Okay, I was in Nottingham Trent University. Yes, and I think the techniques that they are using with us as a students was brilliant.
Thank you for that. Who's coming next? Enase.
You know, as we speak, I just sort of wondered that the question maybe we should be asking is, how are business schools still relevant today, and will they be relevant in the future? Because when we talk about the disruptions that's occurring, we now find that what business schools used to go, as the speakers have just said, we can find anywhere. So we find that there's consulting companies that are offering the training, or tech companies, search engines, organizations are creating their own academies. And therefore, what is the role that business schools are going to play if now that knowledge is being delivered elsewhere? And if, as has also been mentioned, the focus should be on skills, and if you like, the softer skills, are employers going to be looking for degrees? And if not, how are they going to be able to assess the skills? So this calls into question the future relevance of the business school and what employers are seeking. Are they seeking degrees or they're seeking skills?
Okay. Yes, please. Could you just introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Sumaya El-Shubini. I'm an ex-corporate employee for 25 years and now a proud entrepreneur. We work in the business of people and technology. And one of the very proud moments that excited me about coming today was in the launch of Business School 10 years ago. Dr. Kamel launched an internship program in partnership with Microsoft. That was the first internship program introduced in the business school, and we were very proud, and I was played a very small part in kind of launching that. The learning for me from that program was that the students came in, they worked on a project if they were undergraduates, and if they were preparing for their last year in university, they took that project with the aspiration that they would write a thesis or deliver a project or deliver an outcome using that practical experience. And for us as an organization at that time, it was amazing to see the ideas being generated from students who essentially were really not telling us anything but showing us the things that we weren't seeing. So I think practical experience really counts. Another personal experience that I had now that in my new world as an entrepreneur is working with small businesses to try to influence the mindset around the importance of the learning culture, about the concepts of adapting and evolving organizations using technology. I want to tell you the disappointing element, despite the statistics that more than 90% of companies in Africa are below 10%, the unfortunate thing is that people who are leaders of organizations today, they only start thinking about learning concepts and introducing the learning culture when they feel that they have matured to a certain point, or they feel that they are under pressure to change for a specific reason. Thank you.
Okay, who's coming
Thank you.
next, please?
My name is Ashraf Bakri. I'm the head of Unilever in Egypt. And I just want to address Inas's point. I'm an employer, so do employers look for skills or for degrees? And I just opened what we look for. So after tomorrow, we have a full day of recruitment. And we will look for 7 things. We call them standards of leadership. And they are mainly purpose-driven. So the candidate we're looking for must be purpose-driven, has personal mastery, and by that we mean he brings the best self, and then agility in thinking, business acumen, talent catalyst, consumer love, and then finally passion for high performance. I think the question that needs to be asked is, how are these, this is the standard that an employer looks for today. And they are very different to what we looked for a few years ago. The question is, how are these integrated in the curriculum of any business school in the world? How are we preparing the students to come to employers ready with these, not only with the technical knowledge that I fully agree with your comment, are now available at a fingertip. So theory versus practice, and building the character rather than building the knowledge.
Excellent point. I was just thinking, when you were listing the 7 points, how many of those, not just we touched upon them in the curriculum, how much we teach our students enough of those issues so that when go there and sit for the interview, you guys and similar organizations, they say, this is the guy he or she I want to hire. Yep, thank you.
Who's next? Please.
I just want to, I work in the consulting business, so I just want to add one thing, and I think Ines mentioned it, which is around values and business ethics. And I remember I spoke with Sharif about this and integrating it in the school curriculum like a few years back, because this is actually fundamental in doing business anywhere in the world, right? The work ethics and the business ethics has a long list under it in terms of practices. And I think, like again, in emerging markets and with the evolution that's happening and purposeful, like sort of organizations and the like, and the triple bottom line, this is really fundamental. Otherwise, like again, we'll not get anywhere in terms of the relationship between the business and societal and how can they marry each other. So business ethics, I think it's fundamental, like in the business world.
Okay. Who's it? There's somebody up there.
Delighted to be here. Thank you very much. It's actually a very serendipitous moment as well. I graduated from INSEAD 5 years back, and Deepak Jain was the dean at that time. So delighted to be here. I just wanted to share 3 points about what we discussed. Look, I finished 5 years back, and a lot of what I studied in classrooms, and INSEAD is, fairly well-known, one of the best business schools. A lot of the concepts that we studied today are less relevant than one would have hoped, largely because of digitization, so on and so forth. And I feel that business schools are going to face this more and more often, even the good ones. How do you keep your curriculum relevant in an era of digitization? So the answer is that you can't, because technology often moves faster than many other things. So how do you equip your students to be able to constantly learn new things at an accelerating pace? So how do you combine like elements of data science and the whole notion of community? It's a clear reason why people go to business school, less for the academic rigor, it's more for learning how to learn. I just feel today business schools need to do that a little more. Second is that shareholder value. I remember Finance 101. Shareholder value was emphasized extensively, and I think that Dan emphasized it in his remarks as well. I think it's time when business schools talk and actually lead by example when it comes to stakeholder value. It's all well and good to say stakeholder value often, but what does that practically mean to embrace that in one's career and life is a whole different ballgame. And I feel that to make that from theory to practical is a different thing. And third, I feel that students must learn to become business builders. Business builders doesn't necessarily need to be a VC-backed, hyper-growing, blitzscaling company. It can be a different scale of a company that's solving a different problem. But I feel that that needs to be a part of the curriculum as well. How do you build a small, scalable business that will last 100 years as opposed to a VC-backed business that won't be remembered 5 years from now? I feel that students need to have that option to pick up either, or whichever they prefer.
Who's next?
Thank you. Andrew.
Andrew.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Main Wilson, and I'm the CEO of AMBA, the Association of MBAs, and BGA, the Business Graduates Association. Just 2 points to consider. For me, one of the fundamental changes coming forward now is for business schools, and we accredit 275 of them, not to look at the student any longer as a 1 to 3 year on-campus relationship, but a 30 to 40 year lifelong relationship. Coronavirus has taught us that the speed of movement in change in business and interdependability around the world is huge. The issue that we're finding is a lot of our schools are trying to build partnerships with the Coursera's, the Future Learns, the edX's, and finding yet no return. And I'm in conversation with the leaders of those external digital-only companies. The MOOCs are largely free. They're trying to monetize micro-credential programs. But we had our board meeting in London on Friday, and the deans are telling me that they've put money into edX and Future Learn, and they're not seeing really any take-up of courses yet. So the interesting issue is, if it's going to be a fairer, evenly knowledge-shared world, where online learning makes education more affordable across Africa, across Asia, what will happen to the disruption if the very brands leading it actually do not become financially viable in the fairly near future themselves? What of digital learning and lifelong learning if the major players actually run out of money before their business models become financially viable? Thank you.
Now, there were other hands up. Who wants to go? Please.
Thank you. Marco Serrato from the University. I serve as Associate Provost at the University of Chicago, and I also serve as Chair of UNICON, that is the International Consortium on Executive Education. And just precisely building on what Andrew was just sharing, I think that one of the key pieces in the future of business education is precisely that lifelong learning perspective. I think that's something that we are hearing more and more within companies, within several different corporations, there is a shift. I think that business schools, we provide learning experiences in 2 main veins. Something that could be defined as a learning just in case, a set of knowledge and concepts that we learned through deeper experiences like an MBA, but also there is a huge trend to learn also just in time, because the context is changing so much and so fast that individuals and corporations are demanding how is it that they can keep the pace and be able to upskill, to reskill based on the different demands that are taking place nowadays. So I think that this lifelong learning perspective, how is it that we support individuals and organizations to keep track of that, it's crucial. And a key point to provide that, I fully agree also on the fact that there is a challenge. There is a lot of content out there nowadays in the digital world. The question that arises is, how do I identify not only the content, the right content based on what is relevant for that individual, but the second piece, while being business schools, it is not only about the content, but it is also about the learning experience and what type of learning experiences we provide while being institutions, as that is, I think that is part of our core as well.
Please.
Hi, my name is Mohammed Al-Qalla. I'm the CEO of CIRA, or Egypt's largest investor in private education. And I'll try to be brief, and I'll just focus on some insights. I'm also an angel investor, so I do a lot of work with entrepreneurs. First thing I want to bring your attention to is it's very important to teach students to be real and grounded. Up to your point, you cannot have your head in Silicon Valley and do business in Africa. You have to understand your ecosystem and learn a lot about it. We face a lot of graduates coming with very nice presentations that are being taught at universities, but they have no clue how to implement it in reality. And the problem is that they get too dreamy to the extent by facing challenges after challenges implementation, nothing really gets grounded. And that's a big problem most of businesses see. The virtue of persistence. You remember, a very successful African entrepreneur once told me, if there's one comment I would give to graduates would be, the biggest skill you need in Africa is to know that you're going to bang your head against the wall for 10 times until you get through. It's not by a nice looking glossy presentation. That's number one. Number two, and I think it's very, very important, is that we're still talking about globalization. We teach that to our kids in every single classroom. I think when this needs to be relooked a bit, given the political environment we're seeing now. There is an economic change. If we keep teaching them that the virtue of globalization is taking over, well, there's news every day that's saying things are changing. And we need to adjust to this change moving forward. Finally, and a very important angle would be, you have to implement the element of inclusivity in how you do business in this part of the world. Graduates of top schools are only thinking of big numbers, of multiples. When they think of the biggest project, the first thing that comes into mind is the multiples of Tesla, although 99% of your community is below lines of poverty. And basically, you need to think of how you're going to bring value and business to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Virginijus Kundratas. I'm representing three, actually, different kind of stakeholders. Small Business School in the United States, Association of Business Schools in the Baltic area, Baltic Management Development Association, and also consulting company operating in Lithuania. And looking from these various perspectives, what I can see, I see one big threat enforcing what Russia has been saying previously. But business schools, we all agree on the content. What, when leaders needs to be entrepreneurial, skillful, moral, etc. But we believe that we are capable to develop them individually. I don't believe that this will work, because we need to talk more a little bit how we can do that in the way of a collaborative leadership. So we are not teaching them how they really can achieve that together in a teams, where sometimes you are leading, sometimes you are lagging behind a little bit, because otherwise you would not be able to get out of the trap of your knowledge. I saw a lot of CEOs who talk a lot. They are very skillful, but they do not let to open mouth to their employees, and they have a lot of the knowledge to share. So if we are capable to think a little bit through that lens, what this win-win notion would not be, I win twice, you win nothing, but it would be really win-win on both sides. So whole concept on individualistic leadership probably should be turned a little bit into the collaborative leadership. And how to do that? We have some experiences how we do that in our small business school, at this graduate school in the United States. I would be able to share that later on if somebody would be interested. But I think on the bigger schools level, where they are very good in their particular subjects, it's a bit more challenging to do that. But I think that's the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Just by point of clarification, we're limiting each intervention 2 minutes, but that doesn't mean that everybody needs one intervention. I mean, you can intervene as many times as you want, just to make it clear. Yeah. Shaynaz?
You can be greedy. You can have 2 minutes. I mean, we want the conversation to keep going.
Hello, my name is Shaynaz Ahmed. My name is Shahinaz Ahmed. I'm the country director of Ahmed East in Egypt, and I'm from a development and education background. So this is very interesting to be talking about business. But just from another perspective, we're making the assumption that young people today from different backgrounds want the kind of jobs that are afforded as a result of graduating from an MBA. And I think that begs the question here, do they really want these jobs? Do they really want to make a lot of money? Is that the kind of value that different communities in the world are looking for? And I think that hits at the core of why business schools exist. And I want to kind of compare that to something very, very extreme. If you go on Instagram, there's a man called Gary Vee. He's an early investor in Twitter, Facebook, and Snapchat. And he does these little videos on Instagram that are really, really powerful, encouraging entrepreneurship. And he talks a lot to young kids who are 10 years old, 10 and 12 and 8, and who are doing business. They're buying products and selling products online, which is, to my mind, absolutely insane. But that is actually happening in the world today. This is happening in the US, it might be happening in a lot of Western countries, but I think that kind of potential and that drive does exist here and in other countries as well. So it does really raise the question, what is the context that we have here, and do young people want to work in corporate Egypt or corporate MENA region? And so that raises the question of what should business schools look like? And I think it's worth looking at.
I can actually, just to share our experience, if you go back 30, 40 years in this very same school, very same university, students were the sons and daughters of predominantly civil servants. Today, and probably starting 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, they are by and large sons and daughters from people in business, family businesses. So the dynamics on campus changed. Big deal. That obviously pushed not just the school, but the different programs offered on campus to adapt the programs to fit the kind of student population we're getting. Having said that, from one end, I see this as a disruptive element. Another disruptive element is, campuses around the world always brag about the percentage of international students on campus. And they come back and say, we have 102 nationality, we have 150 nationality, we have a 60 nationality, so on and so forth. That's very interesting as well, because that in itself is a disruptive element also. So again, if you go back the history of that school, 60 years ago, 80% of the student body were international. Today, we're hardly hitting 12%. So the dynamics change over time. Obviously, geopolitical, socio-economic factors come into the mix, but you keep on adapting the curriculum to the student body, the diversity of the student body on campus. I see less diversity as a problem to the learning process, but you still need to adapt to who's in the classroom, whether the background they're coming from or the different culture and setup they're coming from.
Deepak. Oh, he's letting you go first. He's a gentleman.
Thank you. My name is Nelly Zayet. I work in student advising and scholarship management. I also work as an advisor to the current Minister of Education here in Egypt. I want to actually take the conversation to a little bit earlier than what actually happens inside the classroom in the business school, because I work with people who aspire to join and be in business schools, applying to business schools. And usually, what is the biggest obstacle for someone to go to INSEAD or Harvard or AUC or most of the business programs is a GMAT requirement, right? And I feel like that is the biggest sign of irrelevance to what happens later in that person's life, how successful they are. Honestly, I meet so many people, and I think we all do, who may not do well on the GMAT, but who may be very successful business people. And until today, this is still a big factor, even though, you know, when you talk to admissions officers, they say, no, we look at the whole package and we consider every part of your application. This is not a deal breaker. But then when you look at the statistics and the numbers, you need like a 700 to get into the Harvard Business School. So that is, I think, the first message that business schools send out to people about what matters to them. And I think it starts there, like this chasm between what happens in a business school and what actually matters in the world starts as early as the admissions requirements. And I just wanted to throw that out there and see if we think we should do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very often, as deans, we get a question that what do you actually teach in business schools? Because if you go for a program in physics, economics, there is a well-defined structure. And my answer to that question always has been, we teach our students how you put structure on unstructured problems. And we teach the structure through 3 words: skills, tools, and concepts. Because that's what we are training for. So when you look at business schools, courses that are well structured, like microeconomics, statistics, financial accounting, today there is no need for us to spend classroom teaching on that. We need to think of a well-defined blended learning where we give students these set of courses, let them prepare before they join, and have just what I call a proficiency test rather than a grading test. And classrooms should be more driven by discussions, deliberations on problems, which I define on 3 dimensions. One, of course, academic excellence. Second is business relevance. And third is social significance. So the curriculum should be integrated in a way where we prepare our students for the world with a purpose. So I say preparation, performance, and purpose, they need to be integrated. And that's how we can make business programs more cost efficient, the duration can go, more effective, because then you focus on what is required, and also create what I call a competitive edge. I didn't tell you what my current role is. Currently, I'm unemployed, given what is happening in China, so I have lots of free time. But as a profession, I'm the European president of a business school in China. So just imagine how global today the world is. A person who grew up in a small town in China, educated in India, a US citizen, appointed as the European dean in a Chinese business school, right? Without being a European, right? So you can imagine how global business education has become. Thank you.
Please.
Hi, I'm Ibrahim Jamali. I'm coming from the Al Ayan School of Business at the American University of Beirut. I'm an associate professor of finance and the chair of the Department of Finance and Accounting. So I just want to go back to the points raised earlier. First of all, about experiential learning. So I'll just tell you about our experience at the Al Ayan School of Business. So we established an investment management program in which we thought about that very carefully. It's not virtual money. We give our students real money, $1 million. And we say, you have certain parameters, an investment philosophy, and you have to beat a benchmark. Our experience with these students is that they come out to be very complete in the sense that they are team players. They assume responsibility. They always bring their best self. So going back to the issues raised before, they're always professional. They're always ready. And they do a wonderful job. We have another initiative in the school, which is case competitions. Again, the students representing us in case competitions always, consistently, bring their best selves, always. And I can tell in my classroom who has been part of these experiential learning experiences and who hasn't. And for me, the complete student is the one that's been in such experiences. Another point I wanted to come back to is the fact that we need to create local knowledge, going back to Inas's points. So we need to create local knowledge. So for example, now Lebanon is facing a serious banking and unfortunately economic crisis. A colleague of mine is teaching a course on commercial banking with a US textbook. So the students, the very first question would be, why do I need to learn about the US? I have a huge banking crisis here. Talk to me about Lebanon. I'm going to be teaching executives in a few days, and I can guarantee you, the first question is going to be, what's happening to Lebanon's economy? Don't talk about the US, don't tell me about supply and demand, tell me what's happening in this place. Thank you.
You can come back again.
So I'm going to push back a bit against some points of view. So on ethics, Delia has mentioned that we can create. I'm obsessed with transformation much more than I'm obsessed with learning. So when we teach like the ethics and the values, what is happening with lecturing these days is that I'm lecturing in colleges and I have the chance to lecture at Harvard. People are not transformed. The kind of knowledge they take, they are not like being transformed, the applied. What we're thinking about is that it's a kind of knowledge that is just building up and they tend to forget or just remember a quarter of it. So with the ethics and the values, I graduated from masters from Harvard. They tend to, I think schools have to be we're very late in teaching leadership throughout the years because leadership involves the transformation process, how they can float in uncertainty, how can they face their fears, how they can manage teams, how can they let go of their egos while their egos are subjugated. So there is a lot of things under the umbrella of leadership we're talking about, and we're now teaching leadership to executives and not to students. And that's what we mean by skills. The other thing is that I'm not against the knowledge and the curriculum. It's amazing what you're doing here at the AUC or at NCIAG or MIT or whatever, but they should be moving hand in hand together. The other thing is that I found a problem in when we searched a lot about what is happening in organizations and when do we find the elephant is stuck in the room, it is not technical. With technical problems, we usually deal with it with expertise, knowledgeable people. But when it is an adaptive problem, it is very different. And here is the main thing that happens in the failure. Thank you.
Who's next? Inase again.
Thank you. Taking advantage that we can speak multiple times. I just sort of wonder to what extent the changing profile of the learners we're getting should affect how we teach and what we teach. And if we have people coming into schools now that belong to Gen Zs, the Generation Z, the way they learn, which is that they learn from one another, they learn using technology, they learn on the go in bite-sized pieces. How is that shaping how we deliver? And if, just to piggyback on what Deepak Jain said, to say, should it be more a discussion like style learning and experiential learning, projects that's by doing rather than by sitting in a formal classroom, that's one. And then the second is, to what extent do what these people want to learn shape the curriculum? When we talk about curriculum, we're always saying, what do the employers want? What do we think that they need in order to do that? But then, as was mentioned earlier on there, could it be that these Gen Zs that are coming into the school today are looking for something else or have aspirations other than to work in big corporations and make money? Could they be looking for impact? And if so, to what extent do we allow those to shape the curriculum? Just some thoughts.
Have you dried up, or is there somebody else coming forward? Please.
Okay, hi again. Are you going to, okay, it's on now. So I would like only to add something about sharing the experience. I mentioned that actually when I just talked at the beginning. What you said about talking about local examples is really important for our students to understand actually what they are, what's going around. I will give you a very funny example actually. I was attending one of the lectures in my college, and the faculty was actually talking about a concept And she's giving them actually an example about what's happening in UK. And after a few minutes, I was asking my students, did you understand what's this concept mean? Like 90% of the students are from Saudi Arabia. And they said, no, it's a new concept and we're gonna actually read about it when we go back home. And I was like, no, she's talking about Hafiz. And they were like, oh my God, really? Hafiz is in Arabic, it's just like, you know, like a government system that they give people, like, they don't work like for 1 year, a salary until they find a job. So everyone in Saudi Arabia, they know about the system. But sometimes our students, they misunderstanding the concept because they didn't know it in their country. And after that, for sure, I gave the faculty the feedback and I told her, please try to give them more example about what's happening in Saudi Arabia and instead of just giving them an example of what's happening outside. So this is why I think what you said is right. I will just give another example of, we keep talking about the relationship between the industry and about the academic life. And one of the good example, what I'm doing with my students now is just creating the work environment in the university. A very simple step, by changing the classroom, and instead of just having it as a faculty or a tutor just standing and just put the PowerPoint behind him or behind her, just having as a round table discussions. I noticed since last year that even, you know, like the discussion, I will just take a few seconds. The discussions of my students improved, their presentation skills improved, their eye contact improved. Some students, they don't ever participate. I have to push them to participate. They start participating by themselves. So creating this environment in the classroom or even in the university is very important. And also to engage the guest speaker from the industry, like instead of just like sitting with the CEO, with the top people in the College of Business, we can just invite them to sit with our students. And we did this actually in our college. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You again.
I just realized I forgot to mention what I do. So I run a company called Network Capital. We basically use AI to match talent with opportunities. And one thing that I'm seeing, it's a global company. One common facet that I see amongst people who are aspiring to go to business school, who are transitioning out, is the influence of politics isn't separate from business.
Of course.
So I feel that today, and especially as we march into the future, I feel that business school graduates need to have a deeper and more nuanced understanding of how politics operates. And how is it that, as and when they become business owners or business participants, what kind of role are they expected to play? I think it's all well and good to have an understanding of what it means by reading The Economist or the Financial Times. But I think its time has come for business to play an active role in shaping this. There's been abundant research done by HBS, INSEAD, Kellogg, what have you, on what they call an adaptive leader. An adaptive leader typically tries to address his or her problem in their own backyards. So we need to train MBA graduates to actually address problems, of course, for their customers. But you can't ignore problems sitting right behind you. And how do you do that? By engaging actively with politics and society. So it's no longer something that we can ignore and do it later or play a passive role hoping for it to pass away. How do you train the students to be that?
Dan?
My mind is swimming with so many ideas. I'm not sure I can clearly articulate them as well as Deepak has done. I should have mentioned him earlier as one that I've learned so much from over the years. Thanks for that, Deepak. You know, listening to the conversation, one thing is increasingly clear, and that is there's no such thing, and this is a point that Sharif made earlier, as a single model that fits all the schools. And it really is incumbent on us to contextualize, to understand the needs of not only business and our systems, our economies, our countries, and build from there. And it's increasingly clear that we shouldn't let boundaries, existing traditions, hinder that ability. I think this is something that several people emphasized, the opportunity to break boundaries. I just want to make a couple of smaller references that I think might be interesting. I had a conversation with a couple of senior people at two very large technology companies. I won't say who they are, but they both begin with A. Right? And they said, one said that the way we recruit is very different than we used to. In fact, one thing, we're continuing to do what we've always done, but increasingly we're recruiting by acquiring companies. Little ones. So about once a month, they acquire companies not for the technology, but for the talent. And several people have emphasized that that experience is essential moving forward. I'm going to leave you with this one thought, because we haven't talked a lot about faculty. The other A, the other person said something like, I've been a business professor, now I'm with this company, and I could tell you with no uncertainty that business school professors do not care about business. They care about publishing in journal articles. So I just want to put that out there as something that could be part of our discussion. Those weren't my words, by the way, for the video cameras. Those are somebody else's.
Actually, those words came from an article in Harvard Business Review, almost, where the article by Warren Bennis and Jim O'Toole, which was called Why Business Schools Lost Their Way. And they describe what you've just said as the dirty little secret of business schools. What has happened in business schools with a curriculum that's become very well defined is actually the inmates are running the asylum. In other words, the faculty are publishing in the highest quality journals, micromanaging the whole reward process, and all the things that everybody's saying here that are necessary for us perhaps to do are secondary to that proposition. Now, that's a proposition that didn't just come from you. It's been around for a period of time. And yet it is the dirty little secret. It's the whole argument in business schools about rigor and relevance. And the people on the rigor side are the ones who are going for the A journals and, you know, Nirvana and whatever that may be, and getting promoted and so on. And the relevant people are saying what some people have been saying here, and, you know, quite heavily, which is mixing practice with theory. And it's...
Just 1 second, let me just comment and actually build on what Dan just mentioned. A bit of a parallel to what you just said. Actually, it's mind-boggling when sometimes, for example, we invite to campus, and that happened over the last couple of years. At one point, it was the CFO and board member of Twitter. In another occasion was the deputy director of the IMF, who actually just announced today that he's going to step down, David Lipton, and others. You would think that professors of management and business would see this as an opportunity for their students to attend the session. And for David's session, probably students studying economics, when he was here to share his reactions on the IMF program that just took place in Egypt over the past 5 years. Well, that is not the case. And for me, this is just unbelievable. They think, oh, no, we have a session at that time. I mean, that session could be given at any other time. And I feel the exposure to someone who sits on the board and I can't remember CFO or CEO of a company like Twitter or any other company, and we're lucky that frequently these people come to campus. Faculty look at it differently. There was a bit of a chapter I couldn't finish that I need to share with the students. Almost like what you're saying, I mean, publishing in top-tier journal versus really engaging with the industry and exposing the students to probably once-in-a-lifetime experience. So, yeah.
Andrew, you want to come back?
Yeah, just on that very point, I mean, I would absolutely urge you as business schools to change the key performance targets of some of your faculty so that it is less academic research based and more prove that you've got some practical applied work that you've done that businesses say that's right on for what we need right now. But when you set someone's objectives and it's so publishing based, of course someone is going to, for job promotion and protection, do the things that's in their annual appraisal. And when I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs and global multinational business leaders, they can't name a single academic journal. So that schism somehow needs to be bridged. Because one thing's for sure, if you can use research in a business school or a university to competitive advantage, if it's practical and applied, you've got something that none of the MOOC providers care about or provide at all. No MOOC or micro-credentials organization which is looking at high volume and low cost output are even considering research. So it is a potential advantage if the business schools and universities use it smartly.
Please.
My name is Miguel Angel Centeno. I'm a professor. I'm one of the insane people at the asylum. I'm a professor at the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton. I'm also vice dean, so I'm sort of shepherd of the insane inside the asylum. Just a defense on the academic abstraction. I think there is a tension in all business school and all policy schools. We're not a business school, we're a public policy school, between what some people derogatorily call war stories, sort of this is what I did, this is what I faced, etc., and the more abstract, and some would say absurdly abstract, particularly from my economics colleagues. But there is a balance. You can't just run a business school on war stories. You have to teach students to think in new situations. So I can come in and tell you everything that I might have experienced in 20 or 30 years in supply management, let's say. And that's become completely irrelevant in the last 10 or 15 years. So what you really need is to teach abstract skills or abstract forms of knowledge so that students can adapt to new circumstances. How you manage that balance, I agree that there's far too much, and believe me, the number of trees that the Academy is responsible for killing it boggles the mind. I agree that we focus far too much on that. But I also want to caution us on becoming apprenticeship programs. Businesses can have apprenticeship programs. Investment banks can have 1 or 2 year apprenticeship programs because they're very certain about what they want those students to perform. In the absence of that certainty, the best thing you can do for students is to give them tools that are going to allow them to change and are going to allow them to find a recognition of patterns so they can adapt to new situations.
Who else? Please.
I would like just to add the comment about what Dan was saying about like faculty, most of the faculty are caring more for publication. So if you think about it, it's not because they love publication or because they actually want to ignore to balance between the theory and between the practice in the classroom, but sometimes it's required from the Ministry of Education, it's required from their schools, and at the same time required from the accreditation. When the accreditation actually come to you, they will ask you for scholarly, how many scholarly academic do you have? How many publications do you actually did during the last 5 years? Sometimes they ask about how you are actually making a balance, but this is the most important point for them. You will not get actually any promotion if you're not publishing, but no one will know anything about your work with the school, with your students inside the classroom if you are making a balance between what you are teaching and what's happening in the industry. So I don't want to blame them, but this is actually what's happening in the academic life, I think, with the faculty.
Okay, so my mind is floating with so many ideas as well, so I just wanted to share that. But a couple of things. First of all, in the next 10 years, 90% of jobs will be recreated. Okay, so that's kind of a fact that we have to deal with. Another thing, the skills, I love, Ashraf, what you said, but the evolution of the required skills of the new world of work are basically 3: problem solving, creative thinking, and collaboration. So those should essentially apply to anything and everything. We teach technology and we teach technical solution solving through schools, but we should be able to teach the core skills in every single thing that we do, in every single concept that we do. I like the three circles that were mentioned, the skills, the concepts, and the tools. In my modest point of view, I think schools should focus on the concepts, because even if you're in a corporate establishment, you still rely on university concepts if you're really, really serious about developing your people, their skills, and your leadership. You do rely on them. However, I do not necessarily think that schools can keep up to speed with what is available and is being made available in the market in terms of concepts, in terms of skills and in terms of tools, because those are evolving all the time. I think the smartness of schools should be to really, really continue to ground themselves on their areas of strength, which is the concept, but they should still open a little door for inclusiveness of new companies that focus on building talent through automation or through AI, or having entrepreneurship labs. That is the gateway between continuing to be relevant.
Rasha, have you got your microphone on again?
No, but I can add a concept here we have to think about, is that I loved what Sharif has been saying on the professors, and I wonder if he had a meeting with them afterwards or not. Based
I had 100 meetings before, but
what Andrew is saying, the change is happening so dramatically, and it's very fast, that no expert is an expert for more than 2 years now. And that's what we're talking about in terms of what Ashraf has mentioned, that he wants somebody inspired, purpose-driven, and all of these skills into it. And that brings me to this concept of a fixed mindset and a growing mindset that we have to teach in our schools. And based on what Mohammed has been saying, that people or students should be grounded and not dreaming up in the air. It's just a match with these.
Please.
The brain power on here is amazing, and the discussion is super. I come from a business background. I run my own business. And the terms skills and mindset came several times. What is required from the job market right now is not being addressed at business schools in the right way. People who have challenged the structured educational system have done phenomenal results. There was once an entrepreneur who said, if you're about to commit to an idea where 99% of the people are telling you it won't work, so you're either gravely wrong or about to make history. So I think right now what we're saying is that we have a structured teaching at all schools of business and expecting a non-structured result. Is it time to challenge the accreditation requirements for business schools? Because obviously the skill set that's required right now to excel in the future, since the job market is changing, are different than what we're used to. And with the presence of technology, then the tools are accelerated in a different way. Is it time for it? Thank you.
Very good. Please.
My name is Shireen Hilmi. I'm the CEO of Falco Pharmaceuticals. During the 2 minutes, the world will lose 2 people from hepatitis C. There are 71 million patients. 7 million was cured in the past 5 years, 4 million of which were from Egypt, the other 3 million from the rest of the world. I learned from Gary Hamel in 1995 in Competing for the Future, who will create the rules of the game of the future, you or your competitors. And he got Nicholas Hayek with the Swatch watch, not the other one. So I thought of the economies of scale, touch the base, and values. When the medicine was for $100,000, I gave it to the Egyptian authorities for 1 Egyptian pound. It was sold at the same time for $100,000. So what we did, we created the rules of the game, we made the snowball, and we touched the base. When we finished all the waiting list, I did not wait. I bought 8 mobile clinics from Germany. I went to everywhere to search for the patients. and the president made the 100 million lives, and we screened 70 million people in 7 months, and we cured everybody. So after finishing, I made it in 2015, 2020, Egypt free from hepatitis C, and luckily it happened. So what I'm doing now, I went to the World Economic Forum in Johannesburg, and we said 2025 Africa free from hepatitis C. But how can we do it? We are going to Africa with 1,000 clinics and with the medicine, but I thought of how to create a small business school where the clinic is, to teach people concepts from the environment, how to make small and micro businesses, so Africa could be the biggest continent in growth in the coming 2 decades. And if you would like to join, we can go with 1,000 stations in 5 years, 10,000 stations in 10 years. Thank you very much. Go and touch the base. Go to the student in the villages. See what is good for them. They shouldn't make a very big concept, but they have to touch the base to formulate things to make their life better, their country better, stability better, and values better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Quite inspirational. Absolutely. Thank you. I mean, I think that's a very clear example of impacting the society, right, left, and center, yeah, and touching the base, of course.
Please.
Sharif, I know quite well that the AUC is not for profit, but I'll share with you an exercise. I was just looking into my notes. So because we invest in the business of education, we have a lot of international PE firms that buy into us, and a lot of college endowment funds. So I have had a very interesting list of questions looking at risks. And I thought of sharing 3 of them with you. One of them was actually, do you have programs for influencers, bloggers? And what's the percentage of these within your student body? That was one of the questions. The second one, which I remember quite well, do you have programs for single individual company holders and the growing culture of consultancy of corporate premise? A third question, which was extremely, extremely interesting, it was actually looking at something that's very different. What is the percentage of women at your student body? And are you following up how many of them have been empowered? And the last one was, what is your plan to ensure that women inclusion crosses 60 or 70% of your body with growing population dynamics? I'm just telling you, I mean, and these have been questions that we tried to answer as a corporate and kept us scratching our head. We do it for profit. I know you don't do it for profit, but I mean, these are the type of questions that are being asked now. And this is where investors are seeing risk in generation to come for universities. So I think that might be helpful.
Well, from all what you said, when it comes to the women part, I think we're doing good.
Oh, Andrew, sorry.
Ashraf, I wonder if we might get some of your expertise from Unilever. I sit on the board of one of Russia's top business schools with Paul Polman, former CEO of Unilever. And Paul was telling me over dinner last month about his great initiative, Imagine, to try and get the top 5 or 6 chief executives in every major industry in the world to simultaneously take on the values of responsible management so that whole industries can have a sea change. And yet I was at a meeting last week on employment, and it seems that many multinationals still aren't asking to see these qualities in the graduates being recruited yet. It's not a point of difference. How do you feel about Unilever compared to other major corporates in terms of wanting to see as a point of recruitment difference the qualities of sustainability and responsible management in graduates?
Thanks for the question. Actually, this was going to be my next comment. I think it's not about Unilever. It is going to happen anyway, whether we feel it's going or not. And there are lots of symptoms. And Sharif, I think this is a very important point for the... When we teach business, usually it's about maximizing revenues sustainably, okay? The problem is with the new, that's not the case anymore. They do care about lots of other stuff. Yeah. They are not going to buy things that are not environmentally friendly anymore. My little 13-year-old daughter is refusing to buy plastic bottles, okay? So these are things that are already happening, okay? Whether companies are taking note of it and making sure that they comply or not is the question that every single organization is going to be forced very soon because consumers now are making choices that are different. They are willing to pay more, and this is not in the books of business, they are willing to pay more to make sure that this is sustainably sourced. Okay? They are willing to boycott a product where they know is not abiding to some rules of ethics. Okay? So this is going to change the business equation that we teach today, because all what we learned earlier is how to maximize profit sustainably. That's not the case anymore. This is not the criteria anymore. I think I'm lucky to work for a company like Unilever and for a person like Paul Polman, who's, in my opinion, a visionary in this field. And he's driving, even after leaving Unilever, he's driving everybody to comply to the global sustainable goals. And I think Unilever has been the #1 on the index of recruitment for the last 8 years. And the single reason for that is sustainability. So no one is talking about the brands, no one is talking about, the new generation is mainly interested to work for Unilever because of the sustainability, that's why.
If I may comment, I fully agree with you, Ashraf, and just a case in point, some 10, 12 years ago, when we restructured the positioning of the school, there were around 3 elements. Given the nature of the economy in Egypt, definitely #1 was entrepreneurship and family business. #2 was economic development, which we're changing now into inclusive development. And #3 was actually responsible business, the bigger picture. So technically, if we look at the themes of the school, 1/3 of them is actually looking at sort of stakeholders' interest and appreciation and value versus just shareholders' value. So absolutely right. And actually, we have one of our, for example, in the context of our school, one of the main pillars of the school is the John Gerhardt Center for Civic Engagement, Philanthropy, and Responsible Business, which has an incredible sort of a stake in community-based development and learning and so on. Thank you.
Deepak?
And just, I see a very interesting segmentation among business schools. And one I describe is a segment what I call value for the brand. So if you look at the top schools, Harvard, Stanford, MIT, Kellogg, Chicago, Columbia, Wharton, INSEAD, London Business School, IMD, they can afford to command the tuition they are having because students go there. The value for the brand is also the value of their alumni community. And they think that the big corporations or the consulting firms will come there and hire. Schools that were private schools in US but do not have the brand attraction, most of them are closing down their MBA programs or reducing it. I don't want to name the schools, but you can see that. The second segment is value for money. And that's why there are certain state schools in US that offer a very good program driven by the state part. So today you have to ask, where would you like to put yourself? And not to brag about it, since I have been at SEABS, you must have seen the rankings. We are #5 both in the MBA and the MBA program, and we stand for both value for brand as well as value for money. We are the cheapest school, half of the tuition what the other top schools charge, and our brand is not less known, being #5 in this thing. So we all as deans have to think about what do you stand for, because there are 2 costs. One is the cost of the tuition, and other is the opportunity cost of the student. And the third is what do they expect once they get the MBA. So people have to think about what are we giving our students for the price we are charging and the time they are giving us in terms of their opportunity cost and how we add value in them. So the value proposition has to be properly aligned with the marketplace.
Please.
So I'm going to take it from where Deepak just finished. I'm asking myself right now, after being an entrepreneur for almost 30 years, knowing what I know today, if I would join a business school, how will it look like? And I just came with 8 very quick points. So it's a school that should be teaching me the basic technical concept because it cannot teach me the advanced ones, but in all the different disciplines, in strategy, in marketing, now in digital marketing, all the different disciplines, but the basics. The second, it's a school that should help me understand the impact of the soft skills and the people that make things happen and how to deal with different profiles, different types of people. The third, it's a school that's gonna teach me the factors that are within my control and those that are outside of my control that will affect my success as an entrepreneur or as a manager or a leader. Then it's a school that will help me visualize as a young person that my role in any company will evolve dramatically, and with it, my skill sets has to change. It's a school that can put me in a certain mindset where I understand that the challenges are a fact of my daily life, but that everything has a solution. And then how to find these types of solutions. And the last thing, it's a school that helped me with the networking or the community that will make me successful in the future. This is a school that I would have hoped to join, yeah.
Anybody else? Please.
Just another example of something to think about. When I did my degree in the UK, and it was also in the UK similar to Samar, the thing that was of most value to me was the experience. And if we talk about brands like Harvard and University of Chicago, a lot of the time students will say that it's the networking experience that they get, the experience from other students, it's the experience that's important. To counter that, there's somebody that I know who is getting a degree in education. It's not relevant to business, but she's 19, she's getting it online, she's traveling, and she's teaching in schools in Asia as she is traveling. And I think that's the kind of experience, whether in business or in other areas of learning, that young people are looking for. It is the experience that is most valuable. That's one thing. The second thing is that one of the things that we might want to also talk about is that there's more of a gig economy that is happening right now, where young people are interested in gigs. There will be somebody that's working for a company, but also doing other kinds of work that either that they're passionate about or that they're interested in, or increases the amount of money that they're making. And that's something that's really important to look at. And so are business schools offering real life experience for young people that when they go into a business environment, they're able to really understand how to operate in that business environment from the experience, not just from textbooks.
Okay, anybody else?
Can I build on what Shahnaz
Sure.
just said, please?
Sure, please.
So, Shahnaz, just to complement what you said, we're moving, it's not only we, but lots of companies are moving now from recruitment to what we call open talent forums. So as we speak right now, we're not limiting the resources we're using to the geography. So if I have a project running in Egypt and I need special expertise, all what I need to do right now is not to search the local market anymore, is to go to a database on the intranet of Unilever and find this special skill, which happens to be someone sitting in the Netherlands who becomes an integral part of the project team who's running this project. And it's project-based. Once it's done, he's gone. Okay? So the competition now is not only about how well educated is the team on the ground, because for certain expertise, it's not about being physically there anymore, because this is what the digital world is allowing. So the competition, even on the skill level, is becoming very different. And the question is, are we producing locally students who can become experts in whatever they do, so they don't get eaten out by other people globally who are really becoming very variable in a certain discipline?
Okay, anybody else?
Marco?
One quick thought, and it's very interesting to be listening to all of these insights. Something that we see that happens to business schools, at least on the executive education landscape, and I think it may apply to business schools overall, is trying to be everything to everyone nowadays, it's a huge challenge. The business world is so complex, so dynamic, that sometimes trying to cover all of those different academic fields and be the best at them, at all of them, is a challenge. The most important thing about a strategy, and we teach a strategy, is not to decide what to do, but to decide what not to do. So I think that we see that happens pretty often in the executive education world. Sometimes we are market-driven. We try to go with the different needs that we hear that are taking place out there. I think that while thinking, as the title of this roundtable states, what the future of business and management education maybe is going to be, is also about choice. And choice is a key part within a strategy.
Okay. Sharif, I know you want to get out of here at 5:30, and part of my remit from you was to try and summarize, which I'm willing to do, but I'm, just like everybody else, beset with lots of ideas. But if you would like me to, I'll do this, and then if you want to make some wrap-up comments, then we can get out at 5:30.
Sure. Why don't you start, and then I'll do the wrapping.
All right. Well, with great apologies, I've been trying to write as I've been going along, and can't always read my writing. So I'm going to put my glasses on and give you what I saw as the highlights. Actually, what I'd like you to do before I give you the highlights is to ponder at the end of it 3 questions about business schools. I mean, and they've come out from almost every one of the comments. The first one is, how did we get to where we are now? What do we do now? And how do we change? And I think those are the 3 questions that really underlie everything we've been talking about. How we got to the point we are now, what we do now, and how do we change? So in order of roughly the comments that came, but then I tried to amalgamate them in my mind as I went along. The first one, really, that came from Anase and Sharif, is that there's no one-size business school that fits all. There's no country that is exactly the same. There's no school in any given country that's exactly the same. And I heard Inase's plea about accreditors, and it is true. You have to understand the country, the context, and the culture to really understand the nature of a business school. And this is just as much true of AUCE as it is of Lagos Business School, as it is of Boston University. You have to understand the country, context, and culture. And in that respect, I then went on to this issue of impact. And as I went through, and you know, I was grateful for Dan's comments. I actually knew what they were before, because we've discussed this many, many times. But actually, when you try and put his comments about impact down, you start talking about the sorts of things that came out were things like inclusivity. Inclusivity has become very important to lots of people, because simply, you know, responsible management was a word that you used, Andrew, and you know, there's a research community in business schools now called the Responsible Research Business Community, which is an ad hoc group of about 30 people, of which I'm one, because I still like research and do it, which is actually trying to achieve the kinds of goals that I think people are talking about very much in terms of these concepts of impact. And I'm not going to go into impact too far, but you know, Dan's points about impact to society as well as impact to business, stakeholder wealth versus shareholder wealth, are in that domain. I think there was a huge plea in various different ways for experiential learning. To some extent, adapting models to the environment. In other words, giving students the opportunity to do a co-op program, or as when I was dean in Singapore Management University, which is my last gig, we had to get, students had to do a course in community service. And they had to do 80 hours of community service. They had to write up their project. The project was managed. It wasn't just going out, and we have an internship program with companies. It was going out and finding villages in Cambodia that didn't have water, or parts of Singapore, believe it or not, which are poor. And there are lots of them. They're right on the side of Singapore Management University, which is downtown in the Raffles Corridor. So, you know, when you think about experiential learning, it's about experiential learning with companies, but also with aspects of society that are important. Now, I found a theme here which Rasha started, and then I tried to put a lot of different things into it. The reason I have a bad back now is I played rugby until I was 35, and I played scrum half, and I've got 5 vertebrae that don't work properly. But either way, I have always felt, you know, I heard Rasha saying very early on in her speech, something like leadership is almost a pseudoscience in universities. I mean, at least I'm not sure whether I captured it correctly. I sort of agree with you. I mean, when I've been dean, we've been trying to hire people who teach leadership. And I think in many ways, leadership is, you know, a team-embodied concept. I mean, I had a rugby coach when I played in Wales, and I also went to school in London. In London, they told me what to do every 10 minutes. Kick, do whatever it was. In Wales, they said, well, there's a simple rule in this game. You score more bloody points than the opposition. And then essentially what they're saying is, find the people on that team with the skills, blend them together, and you make a team. And your point about team, I mean, I started blending this in with leadership, because all of the points you wrote down, and I can't remember where they are on this page, but things like acumen, agility, and so on and so forth, are characteristics that somehow you learn as well, and you learn through experience, and you learn through teaching as well. And the point that one of the ladies up there made was very much you learn from other activities as well. And so this concept of leadership is very, very important. And I think it brings in this whole question of ethics and values and this question of skills. Now, the next one that really got me worked up was the Nottingham Trent University example, where you said you never had any grades. I happen to know the dean of Nottingham Trent University Business School extremely well, and I'm going to confront him when I return to the United Kingdom. But if indeed that's what he has been doing, no, I'm not going to do it, don't worry. I mean, you're safe. And I don't know your first name either, so you're absolutely... Okay, well, I'm not going to... Either way, the important thing that you were talking about is how do you mix theory with practice? We can't give answers right now, but what you're saying is, can you flip the learning process? And I'll give you an example. This book that's in the little red book that's outside, there's a chapter in there on a program we designed in Boston University called the MSMS. And the MSMS program is three terms, and they take a small business, a medium-sized business, and a large business, and that's the project for 35 people in the class. And they then design what teaching they need in order to achieve that project. So in other words, the teachers become hireable or non-hireable by the students. I mean, it's a brave design. We've still managed to keep 35 in the course, and the designer is a guy called Paul Carlisle. For those of you who don't know him in design thinking, he's quite brilliant. And I would just simply say, there's an example of how you can do both of them, but with difficulty, because it's not really scalable. So then I got onto a series of other points. One was about the question of inclusivity, values, stakeholder values, and things of that kind, which have very much to do with the fact that if you go and look at surveys around the place, The Aspen Institute has done several of them recently, and there have been similar studies in Europe, which have basically said that business school students care more about the environment, care more about the world, care more about what's going on, rather like you said your daughter refused to, do something or other. Most daughters do, by the way, but but either way, you've seen a change in the sense of purpose of students. And, when you talk about inclusive growth, what you're also talking about are models of political organization. And somebody around the room, and I can't remember who it was talking about the understanding politics and the role of politics in society. And it is really, really clear that, political organizations, wherever they are, and I'll take President Trump out of this for the moment without comment.
He can be a good guest speaker.
He might be a good guest speaker. He might have an adverse reaction from a number of people. But you do see politicians worrying about climate change. You see politicians wondering about other people than simply themselves, being willing to see other models of capitalism. You see them mentioned in the Financial Times even, where wealthy people are willing to take a higher tax rate in order to fund some of the social welfare. So we're moving towards more a social democracy form of capitalism than the shareholder capitalism that we've seen for a long, long period of time. I'm seeing if there's anything else I've got down here. Oh, yes. Andrew Main Wilson, a number of others, and the gentleman from the University of Chicago, Rico, whom I discovered is not Italian, but was born in Mexico, as part of the conversation I had beforehand. But they talked about lifelong education. And Inase also talked about bite-sized education and mentioned the African Management Initiative, which in 2013 indicated that there were well over 1 million to 1.5 million managers in Africa who are managing companies who had no training whatsoever. And this was the argument for bite-sized learning, and bite-sized learning, which in effect has got moved over into a discussion of lifelong learning by people who have been trained, so both of them could work. And I think there's an area where technology could really make a difference. I'm not sure what else I've got down here. Oh yes, there was the lady over here who talked about admissions, and I couldn't agree with you more. The one thing we did in Singapore Management University when we were founded was we got the Singapore government to allow us to take admissions on holistic grounds. Not A-level scores, not GMAT scores, not SAT scores. They were in the portfolio. We actually interviewed every single student in the first class. We interviewed them about their leadership. We gave them situations. I know Unilever does this in its Unilever training program. It sits and looks at people in a room. We did the same thing. It's not beyond our capability to do some of these things as well. And, and I thought at the end there was a tremendously laudable attempt to define the business school curriculum and what needs to be done. But I think some things do need to be done. I think all of us, when we, in meetings like this, get some ideas, and hopefully we, churn these ideas around, and Deepak, in his usual style, beats me most times by synthesizing things in 3 short elements, and as a marketing professor, got 3 segments. Value of brand, value for money.
And get sandwiched between the two.
And sandwiched between the two. Stuck in the middle, as Michael Porter might have said. Well, look, that's the best I can do for the time I've got. I'm sure that Sharif has got some wrap-up comments, but thank you all for taking part in this and being so open. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Howard. I think you wrap it up perfectly. I have nothing to add except to just to pinpoint on a few words that would describe the 2 hours and probably, I would say, maybe 50 different interventions across the 2 hours. And that is stay relevant, be inclusive. It's a collaborative environment. It's surely disruptive environment. But those who will be able to flexibly, timely respond to that disruptive environment, maybe embrace it, I wouldn't even say drive it because that would be a stretch, will be better positioned to serve their markets, whether locally in their own community or in the regional markets better than the others. I think it's an ongoing journey. It has never been a destination and will never be. And I guess we all keep on at it, try to improve all the time. I'm extremely grateful for everybody for coming here today, for your insights. I can tell you, we were taking notes, just to respond to your point. And I look forward to, again, interacting with you and working with you as we always did. But this has been a forum that we thought about exactly a year ago, February 2019. And the objective was, let's put it together in 2020 and see how it goes. If that works well, we plan to have it as an annual event where we gather community from business, from policy, from industry, from different schools around the world to chat and discuss relevant issues, not just for a certain region or a certain country or a certain school, but of relevance to the world of business and management education. Thank you very much.